The signal came at 3 in the morning, station time. Lieutenant Commander Amy Chen sat alone in the communications center of Station Compass, running through routine scans of deep space frequencies. She had done this job for 5 years, and most nights brought nothing but static and the distant hum of stars. But tonight was different. Her console lit up with an incoming transmission from the Valari sector, a region of space that humanity had been warned to avoid. The signal was weak and broken, cutting in and out like a dying heartbeat. Amy leaned forward and began the slow process of cleaning up the audio. It took her 2 hours to piece together enough fragments to understand what she was hearing. It was a voice. Not human, but close enough to feel familiar. The speaker struggled with English, stumbling over words that did not fit their mouth. But the message was clear. Please, anyone, we are the Nilori. We are dying. The Kovathi have come for our world. They burn our cities. They take our children. We have heard stories of the Deathworlders. The humans. They say you are fierce. They say you are dangerous. We do not care. We have nothing left to offer. No payment, no trade. Only a prayer. Please help us, please. The message repeated on a loop, growing weaker each time. Amy sat in silence for a long moment. Then, she reached for her communicator and called Admiral Jack Morrison. Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, still pulling on his uniform jacket. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. He listened to the recording 3 times without speaking. When it finished, he turned to Amy. How far? He asked. 18 hours at maximum speed, she replied. But sir, that is Kovathi territory. We have no treaties with them. No agreements. If we go there, we could start a war. Morrison nodded slowly. He knew the risks better than anyone. The Kovathi Empire was vast and powerful. They viewed other species as resources to be used and discarded. Humanity had avoided conflict with them by staying out of their way. Going to help the Nilori would change everything. Call an emergency council, Morrison said. Wake everyone up. 1 hour later, the senior officers of Station Compass gathered in the main conference room. Morrison played the recording for them and explained the situation. The response was immediate and divided. This is not our fight, said Commander Williams, the station's logistics officer. We do not know these Nilori. We have no alliance with them. If we intervene, the Kovathi will see it as an act of war. He is right, added another officer. We have 12 colony worlds to protect. We cannot risk them for strangers. Morrison listened to each argument without interrupting. When the room fell silent, he stood and walked to the window that overlooked the stars. Let me ask you something, he said quietly. What kind of species are we? No one answered. We spent thousands of years on Earth fighting each other, Morrison continued. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. But we survived. We grew. We reached for the stars. And now we have the power to do something that no one else will do. We have the power to answer a call for help. He turned to face them. The Nilori are not asking us for money or territory. They are asking us to save their children. If we ignore that, then everything we built means nothing. We become no better than the Kovathi. The room was silent. Then Captain Ben Torres, commander of the USS Resolute, stood up. The Third Fleet is ready, sir, he said. Just give the word. Morrison looked around the room. One by one, the other officers nodded. Mobilize the fleet, Morrison ordered. We leave in 2 hours. The Third Fleet consisted of 12 ships, each one crewed by men and women who had volunteered to serve on the frontier. They were not the largest fleet in the human navy, but they were among the best trained. The flagship was the USS Resolute, a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to challenge ships twice its size. Amy transferred to the Resolute to serve as the primary communications officer for the mission. As she walked through the corridors to her station, she passed crew members preparing for battle. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. Captain Torres welcomed her to the bridge personally. He was a serious man with dark hair and a calm voice that never wavered, even in crisis. "You found the signal," he said. "You should be here when we answer it." Amy took her seat at the communications console and began monitoring all frequencies. The fleet formed up around the Resolute and prepared for the jump to hyperspace. Morrison addressed the entire fleet over the intercom. His voice was steady and clear. "In a few hours, we will enter hostile territory to defend a species we have never met. Some of you may wonder why. The answer is simple. They asked for help. That is enough. We are humans. We do not abandon those in need. Whatever happens next, I am proud to serve alongside each of you." The channel closed and the fleet began its jump. Stars stretched into lines of light as the ships accelerated beyond normal space. Amy monitored the frequencies throughout the journey, searching for any updates from the Nalori or signs of Korvathi activity. 14 hours into the trip, she intercepted a new transmission. This one was not a plea for help. It was a warning. The voice was deep and cold, speaking in perfect English that had clearly been learned specifically for this message. "This is War Chief Draxon of the Korvathi Empire. We have detected your fleet approaching our territory. Turn back now. The Nalori belong to us. Any interference will be met with total destruction. You have been warned." Amy played the message for Captain Torres and Admiral Morrison. Neither man showed any sign of hesitation. "Send a reply," Morrison said. "Tell them we received their message. And tell them we are coming anyway." Amy typed the response and sent it into the void. There was no reply. 4 hours later, the Third Fleet exited hyperspace at the edge of the Valari sector. Before them lay Nalora Prime, a beautiful world of green forests and blue oceans. And surrounding it, blocking out the stars like a swarm of metal locusts, were 47 Korvathi warships. The battle for Nalora Prime was about to begin. The view from the bridge of the USS Resolute was enough to make anyone pause. Nalora Prime hung in space like a jewel, its surface covered with floating forests and crystalline lakes that caught the light of its twin suns. But the beauty was marred by dark scars where orbital strikes had burned through the atmosphere. Smoke rose from a dozen cities. The Korvathi had already begun their work. Admiral Morrison stood at the center of the command deck, studying the tactical display. 47 enemy warships formed a net around the planet. Each one was massive, built for intimidation as much as combat. The Korvathi believed in overwhelming force. They had never needed subtlety. "Sir," Amy called from her station. "I am detecting 6 Nalori vessels near the planet. They are badly damaged. I do not think they can fight much longer." Morrison nodded. 6 ships against 47. The Nalori had been holding on with nothing but courage and desperation. "Open a channel to the Korvathi flagship," he ordered. The main screen flickered, and War Chief Draxon appeared. He was enormous, even by Korvathi standards. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his eyes glowed with a cold yellow light. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "So the Deathworlders have come," Draxon said. He sounded amused. "I have heard stories about your kind. They say you evolved on a world that tried to kill you every day. They say you are predators, dangerous." He leaned closer to the screen. "I think these are just stories. You are soft creatures who have never faced a real enemy." Morrison did not flinch. "We are here to escort the Nalori to safety. Withdraw your fleet, and there will be no conflict." Draxon laughed. It was an ugly sound. "The Nalori are our property. Their world is rich with resources we need. Their people will serve us. This is the natural order. The strong take. The weak serve. He spread his massive arms. You have 12 ships, human. I have 47. Run away while you can. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. I do not think you understand what you are dealing with, he said calmly. Let me show you. He cut the channel and turned to Captain Torres. All ships, attack formation. Target their forward vessels. Show them what a death world produces. The Third Fleet surged forward. Human ships were smaller than Corvathi warships, but they were faster and far more agile. They had been designed by a species that had spent its entire existence hunting and being hunted. Every weapon, every system, every tactic was built around one simple truth. Strike fast, strike hard, and never stop moving. The first Corvathi ship exploded within 30 seconds of engagement. The humans did not fight in neat lines like the Corvathi expected. They darted between enemy vessels, firing from unexpected angles. Working together in perfect coordination. Commander Scott Palmer led the tactical operations from the Resolute. He had spent 20 years studying alien combat tactics, and he knew exactly how to exploit Corvathi weaknesses. They are too slow, he reported. Their guns cannot track our fighters. Focus fire on their engine sections. Disable, then destroy. 8 Corvathi ships fell in the first 15 minutes. Draxon watched in disbelief as his fleet began to crumble. He had expected the humans to flee or surrender. Instead, they fought like cornered animals, except they were not cornered at all. While the battle raged, Captain Torres took a small shuttle to the Nalori flagship. It was a risk, but Morrison had insisted that someone make direct contact with the people they were trying to save. The Nalori ship was barely holding together. Scorch marks covered its hull, and several sections had been exposed to space. Torres docked at an emergency airlock and made his way inside. The Nalori were waiting for him. They were avian creatures covered in soft feathers that ranged from blue to silver. Their bodies were delicate, built for a world with lighter gravity than Earth, and they were terrified. Torres understood why. To them, he must have looked like a nightmare. Forward-facing eyes marked him as a predator. His solid build and confident movement spoke of a creature designed to chase and kill. He was everything their instincts told them to fear. High Speaker Kyrene stepped forward. She was old, her feathers faded to gray, and she walked with the help of a carved wooden staff. But her eyes were sharp and clear. You came, she said. Her voice was thin and trembling. We did not believe anyone would come. Torres knelt down so that he was at her eye level. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible, making himself as small and unthreatening as possible. We heard your message, he said gently. We came as fast as we could. Kyrene studied his face. She saw the predator eyes, the strong jaw, the body built for violence. But she also saw something else. Kindness, warmth, a genuine desire to help. Why? She asked. We have nothing to offer you. No wealth. No technology. Nothing. Torres reached out and carefully took her small hand in his. You asked for help, he said simply. That is all we needed to hear. Tears began to fall from Kyrene's eyes. In all the centuries the Nalori had been part of the galactic community, no one had ever answered their calls. They had been ignored, exploited, and forgotten. And now, these terrifying Deathworlders had crossed hostile space just because they asked. Back on the Resolute, the battle continued. The Corvathi had recovered from their initial shock and were fighting back with brutal force. 2 human ships had taken heavy damage, but none had fallen. Then Amy detected a new signal. Her face went pale. Admiral, she said. Long-range sensors are picking up another fleet. Corvathi reinforcements. Over 100 ships. They will be here in 6 hours. Morrison received the news without expression. He had known this was a possibility. The Kovathi would not let such an insult go unanswered. "Can we evacuate the planet in time?" he asked. "No, sir. Not even close." Morrison looked at the tactical display. 12 human ships, 47 Kovathi vessels still fighting, and over 100 more on the way. The math was impossible, but he had not come this far to give up. "Then we hold," he said. "We hold until there is another option." On the Nalori flagship, Torres received the same news. Kyrene looked at him with fear in her eyes. "You should leave," she said. "Save your people. We are already lost." Torres shook his head. "We do not leave anyone behind. That is not who we are." He stood and looked out the viewport at the burning sky. Somewhere out there, his people were fighting and dying for strangers they had never met. And he had never been more proud to be human. The second Kovathi fleet arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule. 112 warships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately moved to surround the human position. The sky above Nalora, Prime filled with enemy vessels until the stars themselves seemed to disappear. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Resolute and counted the odds. 12 human ships against nearly 150 Kovathi warships. Anyone looking at those numbers would say the situation was hopeless. Morrison had never believed in hopeless. "All ships, defensive formation around the planet," he ordered. "Nothing gets through to the surface." The third fleet pulled back and formed a protective ring around Nalora Prime. They could not win a straight fight against such overwhelming numbers. But they could make the Kovathi pay for every inch of space they took. On the ground, human Marines began landing at key positions across the planet. Their mission was simple: protect the civilians at all costs. Sergeant Lisa Grant led a squad of 12 Marines to the largest refugee center on the northern continent. Over 15,000 Nalori had gathered there, mostly families with children and elderly who could not fight. They had nowhere else to go. When the Marines arrived, the Nalori panicked. They had heard stories about Deathworlders, about the monsters from the poison planet who ate their prey alive. They saw the armored humans with their weapons and their predator eyes, and they screamed. Grant removed her helmet. She had short brown hair and a face covered with old scars from past battles. She was not beautiful, but when she smiled, it transformed her completely. "Hey there," she said softly, kneeling down to look at a group of Nalori children who had frozen in terror. "It is okay. We are here to help." One brave child, a little girl with silver feathers, took a hesitant step forward. "Are you going to eat us?" she asked in a tiny voice. Grant laughed gently. "No, sweetheart. We are going to protect you. That is our job." She reached into her pack and pulled out a ration bar. "Are you hungry?" The little girl looked at the food, then back at Grant. Slowly, she reached out and took it. "My name is Lisa," Grant said. "What is your name?" "Pella," the child whispered. "Well, Pella, I promise nothing bad is going to happen to you while I am here. Okay?" Pella nodded slowly. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She walked forward and wrapped her small arms around Grant's leg in a hug. Grant felt something shift in her heart. She had fought in a dozen campaigns across human space. She had seen terrible things and done things she was not proud of. But in that moment, holding this frightened alien child, she understood exactly why they were here. "Squad," she said firmly. "Set up a perimeter. Nothing touches these people." In orbit, the battle grew desperate. The Kovathi attacked in waves, using their superior numbers to wear down the human defenses. The USS Bright Dawn took a direct hit to its reactor section. Captain Amy Wells, a veteran of 15 years, ordered her crew to abandon ship, but the weapon systems were still operational. Wells and 3 volunteers stayed behind, manning the guns while the rest of the crew escaped. "Get our people clear," Wells said over the comm. "We will cover you." The bright dawn lasted another 40 minutes. In that time, she destroyed 6 Kavathi ships and damaged a dozen more. When she finally exploded, she took 2 more enemy vessels with her. Morrison watched the explosion from the bridge of the Resolute. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He would remember their names. He would remember all of them. In the skies above the refugee center, young Ensign Danny Park flew his strike fighter through a storm of enemy fire. He was 23 years old, barely out of flight school, and he had never seen real combat before today. His squadron had been reduced to 4 ships. They were running low on ammunition and fuel. But a Nalori transport carrying 2,000 civilians was trying to reach the surface, and a Korvathi cruiser was moving to intercept. "I have the shot," Danny reported, "but I will have to get close." His squadron leader replied immediately, "Negative. That is suicide." Danny looked at his instruments. The transport was 10 minutes from safety. The cruiser would reach it in 5. There was only one option. "Sorry, sir," he said. "Some things are more important." He pushed his throttle forward and dove straight at the cruiser. His weapons locked onto the enemy's engine section. He fired everything he had. The cruiser's engines exploded, sending the massive ship spiraling out of control. Danny tried to pull away, but the blast caught his fighter and sent him tumbling toward the planet. He managed to regain control just before hitting the atmosphere. His ship was badly damaged, barely flying, but he was alive. And behind him, the transport reached the surface safely. On the ground, healer Sareth worked alongside human medics to treat the wounded. She was an Nalori doctor who had trained her whole life to save lives. She had never imagined working beside Deathworlders. At first, she was terrified of them. Their hands were so large, their movements so powerful. But she watched as a human medic named Carl Jennings gently stitched a wound on a Nalori child, his big fingers moving with incredible delicacy. "Why do you do this?" she asked him during a brief rest. "Why risk your lives for us?" Carl looked up from his work. He was tired, covered in blood and dirt, but his eyes were warm. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And we can." Soreth did not understand. In her experience, the strong took from the weak. That was how the galaxy worked. But these humans kept breaking every rule she knew. High Speaker Kyrene broadcast a message to her people. Her voice echoed across the planet, reaching every shelter and hiding place. "The Deathworlders bleed for us," she said. "They die for us. They do not know us. They owe us nothing. But they fight anyway. If they can find such courage, so must we. Every Nalori who can hold a weapon, join the fight. We will not let them stand alone." The remaining Nalori ships, battered and barely functional, moved to join the human line. Nalori volunteers picked up weapons and reported to the refugee centers. They were not soldiers, but they were ready to defend their homes. Morrison received word that help was coming. Admiral Grace Webb, commander of the 4th Fleet, had heard the battle transmissions. She was bringing 30 ships, but they were 12 hours away. 12 hours. Morrison looked at the tactical display. His fleet was down to 7 operational ships. The Kovathi had lost over 60 vessels, but they still had nearly 90. "Can we hold for 12 hours?" Captain Torres asked. Morrison did not answer immediately. Then he looked at his crew, at the determination in their eyes, and he knew. "We will hold," he said. "Whatever it takes." The survivors would later call it the Long Night. 12 hours of continuous battle. 12 hours of fire and blood and desperate courage. It was the longest night in human military history. Admiral Morrison had not slept in over 30 hours. He stood on the bridge of the Resolute like a statue, his eyes fixed on the tactical display as ship after ship flickered and died. The Third Fleet was being torn apart, but they refused to break. The Kovathi could not understand it. War Chief Draxon had fought dozens of species across the galaxy, and all of them followed the same pattern. When the odds became impossible, they surrendered or fled. That was the logical response. That was what any sane creature would do. But the humans did neither. They kept fighting. What is wrong with these creatures? Draxon growled at his officers. They are outnumbered. They are outgunned. Why do they not run? Sub-Commander Varek, a younger officer standing near the back of the bridge, watched the battle unfold on his screen. He had been raised to believe that the Kovathi way was the only way. The strong dominated the weak. That was the natural order, but what he saw now challenged everything he believed. A human destroyer, its hull torn open and venting atmosphere, moved to intercept a Kovathi carrier that was targeting a Nelori hospital ship. The destroyer could not survive the engagement. Everyone on both sides knew it. The human captain did not hesitate. He drove his dying ship directly into the carrier's path and opened fire. When his weapons ran empty, he activated his engines and rammed the carrier at full speed. Both ships exploded. The hospital ship escaped. Varek stared at the screen. They sacrificed themselves, he said quietly. For strangers. No one answered him. No one had an answer. On the ground, the refugee center came under direct attack. Kovathi dropships broke through the orbital defenses and landed a strike force 2 kilometers from the main camp. Sergeant Grant rallied her squad and moved to intercept. They were 12 Marines against over 100 Kovathi soldiers. The odds were terrible, but Grant had faced worse. Hold the line, she ordered. No one gets past us. The battle was brutal. Kovathi warriors were huge, nearly 3 meters tall, with armored scales and claws that could tear through metal. But the humans were faster, smarter, and far more determined. Grant fought like a demon. She had been a soldier for 15 years, and every bit of that experience came into play. She led her squad through a fighting retreat, making the Kovathi pay for every meter of ground. Little Pella had followed Grant despite being told to stay in the shelter. When a Kovathi soldier broke through the line and charged at the child, Grant did not think. She threw herself between them, taking a claw strike across her back that would have killed Pella instantly. Grant screamed in pain but did not fall. She raised her weapon and shot the Kovathi soldier point blank. Sergeant! One of her Marines shouted. I am fine, Grant gasped, blood soaking through her armor. She scooped up Pella with one arm and kept moving. Keep fighting. In the medical tent, Carl Jennings worked without rest. Human and Nelori, wounded, lay side by side, and he treated them all the same. His hands were steady even as explosions shook the ground around him. Helisaurus worked beside him, learning human medical techniques on the fly. She had never seen anyone work so hard or so selflessly. You should rest, she told Carl during a brief pause in the fighting. He shook his head. Too many people need help. I will rest when they are safe. A Nelori child was brought in with severe burns. Carl examined him quickly and realized the injuries were beyond what he could treat with the equipment he had. The child would die without proper surgery, but there was no surgeon. There was no hospital. There was only Carl and his basic medical kit. He looked at Sorith. I need you to guide me. Tell me where your organs are, how your blood flows. I am going to try something. For the next 2 hours, Carl performed surgery on an alien child using nothing but field equipment and instructions from Sorith. It should have been impossible. The child should have died a dozen times, but Carl refused to give up. And when it was over, the child was stable. Sorith looked at the human medic with new eyes. How did you do that? Carl wiped the sweat from his face. Stubbornness, he said. We are really good at not giving up. In orbit, the USS Resolute took a direct hit to engineering. The blast threw Amy across the bridge, and she felt something crack in her ribs. But she pulled herself back to her station and kept working. Captain Torres was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he never left his chair. "Damage report," he ordered. "Engines at 40%. Weapons at 60%. Shields failing." Torres looked at Morrison. The Admiral had not moved from his position throughout the entire battle. His face was calm, his eyes steady. "Sir," Torres said quietly, "we cannot hold much longer." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then we make them work for it." He opened a channel to all ships. "All vessels, advance. We are going to push right through their center." It was a crazy order, suicidal, but every captain in the fleet acknowledged without hesitation the remains of the Third Fleet. 7 battered ships charged directly into the heart of the Corvathi Armada. They did not try to survive. They tried to hurt the enemy as much as possible before the end. Draxum watched the human charge with something approaching disbelief. "They are insane," he muttered. Completely insane. But his fleet was exhausted. His ships had taken more damage than he ever expected. And these impossible humans kept coming, kept fighting, kept refusing to die. Then, 6 hours early, the Fourth Fleet arrived. Admiral Grace Webb had pushed her ships beyond their limits to reach the battle in time. 30 fresh warships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the Corvathi. "Rear guard." Webb's voice crackled over the comm. "Jack, you old fool. I told you not to start the party without me." Morrison almost smiled. "Better late than never, Grace." The tide of battle shifted instantly. The Fourth Fleet tore into the exhausted Corvathi forces while the Third Fleet regrouped. Fresh human ships fought with savage efficiency, and the Corvathi line began to crumble. Varek watched his fleet fall apart around him. He had seen enough. These humans were not monsters. They were not mindless predators. They were something far more dangerous. They were protectors. And the Corvathi had made enemies of them. Draxon faced a choice. He could continue fighting and lose his entire fleet, or he could retreat and save what remained. Pride demanded he stay and fight. But pride would not rebuild his ships or bring back his dead. He gave the order that no Corvathi commander had given in a century. "All ships, withdraw." The long night was over. The Corvathi fleet limped away from Nelora Prime, leaving behind the burning wreckage of over 90 warships. It was the worst defeat in their empire's history. War Chief Draxon stood alone on his bridge, watching the distant blue jewel of Nelora Prime grow smaller as his ships fled. He had come here expecting an easy conquest. He was leaving with less than half his fleet, and a lesson he would never forget. The Deathworlders had earned their name. On the surface of Nelora Prime, the Nelori emerged from their shelters as the sun rose over the horizon. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, free of Corvathi ships and orbital fire. They looked up and saw human vessels maintaining a protective formation overhead. Sergeant Grant sat on a broken wall outside the refugee center, finally allowing a medic to treat the deep wound on her back. Little Pella sat beside her, refusing to leave her side. "Does it hurt?" Pella asked, watching the medic work. "A little," Grant admitted, "but I've had worse." "You saved me," Pella said quietly. "That big monster was going to hurt me, and you stopped him." Grant reached out and gently touched the child's feathered head. "That is what we do, sweetheart. We protect people, especially the little ones." Pella's family found her an hour later. Her mother rushed forward and swept the child into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned to Grant and did something the sergeant never expected. She bowed deeply, touching her forehead to Grant's hand. "Thank you," the mother said. "Thank you for saving my daughter. I will never forget what you did." Grant felt tears prick her own eyes. She cleared her throat roughly. "Just doing my job, ma'am." But she knew it was more than that. It had always been more than that dot in orbit. Admiral Morrison finally allowed himself to sit down. He had been standing for nearly 40 hours, commanding his fleet through the longest battle of his career. Now that it was over, exhaustion hit him like a wave. Captain Torres brought him a cup of coffee. "We lost 5 ships," he reported. "The Bright Dawn, the Northern Star, the Swift Justice, the Mercy's Grace, and the Distant Thunder. Over 2,000 crew members dead or missing." Morrison accepted the coffee and stared at the dark liquid. 2,000 people who would never go home. 2,000 families who would receive the worst news of their lives. "They died well," he said quietly. "They died protecting people who needed them." "Yes, sir." They did. High Speaker Kyrene requested a meeting with Morrison aboard the Resolute. She arrived in a simple shuttle, accompanied only by Healer Sorth. When she stepped onto the human ship, she moved slowly, her age showing in every step. Morrison met her in the main conference room. He offered her a seat, but she remained standing. "Admiral," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I do not have words for what you have done. My people have been part of the galactic community for 300 years. In all that time, no one has ever helped us. We called out during famines and plagues and wars, and the galaxy ignored us." She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. "But you came. You crossed hostile space. You fought against impossible odds. You bled and died for people you had never met." She looked up at him with tears in her ancient eyes. Why? Morrison thought for a long moment. It was a question he had been asked many times during the battle, and he had given different answers each time. But now, with the fighting over and the dead still being counted, he wanted to give the truest answer he could. "We know what it is like to face extinction," he said slowly. "Our history is full of moments when we almost destroyed ourselves. Wars, plagues, disasters. We survived because people helped each other. Strangers helped strangers. Enemies became allies." He met her eyes directly. "We decided long ago that if we ever had the power to help others, we would. Not for payment. Not for power. Just because it is right." Kyrene was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She knelt before Morrison and pressed her forehead to his hand. The highest gesture of respect in Nilori culture. "From this day forward," she declared, "the Nilori stand with humanity. Your friends are our friends. Your enemies are enemies. Whatever you need, we will give. Whatever burdens you carry, we will help share." Morrison gently helped her to her feet. "We do not need payment," he said. "But friends are always welcome." News of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Sub-Commander Varric defected to neutral space and released recordings of everything he had witnessed. He testified before the Galactic Council, describing how the humans had fought and died for strangers. "I was taught that the strong take from the weak," he said. "I believed it because it was all I knew. But these humans showed me something different. They fought not for conquest or resources. They fought because a dying race asked for help. And they answered." Other species began to look at humanity with new eyes. For years, they had feared the Deathworlders, keeping their distance from the dangerous creatures who had evolved on a world of poison and violence. Now they understood that there was more to humans than fangs and claws. They were guardians. Ambassador Helen Cruz arrived at Nilora Prime to begin formal diplomatic discussions. The Nilori requested a permanent alliance with Earth, the first such alliance in their history. Cruz signed the treaty in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. A memorial service was held for the fallen. Human and Nilori names were read together, each one honored equally. Sergeant Grant stood in the crowd, her wounds still healing. and listened as the names of her fallen comrades echoed across the gathering. Ensign Danny Park, promoted to lieutenant for his actions, visited the graves of his squadron mates. He had survived the battle, barely, and sometimes he wondered why he had made it when so many others had not. "I will make it mean something," he whispered to the silent markers. "I promise." Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Resolute as the ceremonies concluded. The stars stretched out before him, countless points of light in the endless darkness. So many worlds out there. So many people who might one day need help. Amy joined him, her ribs still wrapped in bandages. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the Laura Prime turn slowly below them. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Morrison considered the question. The Kolvathi would not forget this defeat. Other enemies might see humanity's actions as a threat. The galaxy had become more dangerous for humans than ever before, but it had also become more hopeful. "We keep doing what we did here," he said. "We keep answering the calls that no one else will answer. We keep protecting people who cannot protect themselves." Amy nodded slowly. "Even when the odds are impossible?" Morrison smiled slightly. "Especially then." The galaxy had always feared the Deathworlders. They had told stories about the monsters from the Poison Planet. The predators with their forward-facing eyes and their endless hunger for violence. Now those stories would change. Humanity did not fight because they loved war. They fought because they could not stand by while the innocent suffered. They would cross any distance, face any enemy, sacrifice anything to protect those who needed them. And that, more than any weapon or warship, was what made them truly dangerous. The dawn had come to Nalora Prime, and across the galaxy, other worlds were beginning to wonder if perhaps the Deathworlders were not monsters after all. Perhaps they were something far more wonderful. Perhaps they were hope.